Hey, well, good day, everybody at Real Life Canyon Church, everybody watching online, everybody outside. We are so glad that you are with us. As was mentioned, we are very excited about camp coming up. So if you have not given a scholarship for a student to be able to go, that would be awesome. Any amount helps. You can do that online. You can do it through the app or as you leave here as well. We are kicking off a new series today simply called Signs. And when you think of the word signs, you might think of different traffic signs that you see or that you choose to overlook. No judgment. I'm just saying, I've seen it. But there's a lot of very famous signs that we all recognize. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, you recognize this sign right here. If you are a different kind of fan, you might recognize this sign right here. And again, no judgment. And somebody's got the car running. So anyway, that's a big one. Now, here's another one. This is very popular, obviously, because of where we live. But I didn't know this, but apparently this was built back in 1923 for a housing addition. And it just stayed ever since. And people have been doing hikes to it and putting signs over it and filming movies around it and everything like that. So that's a sign as well. Now, signs can also be, they can be evidence. If you watch those true crime shows, or any kind of Dateline, the Murder of the Week show, they give you all the evidence, and it's kind of pointing towards something. Signs can point towards other things as well. Like this sign here, it may or may not point to alien life. I don't know, or just a creative farmer. Whatever it is, that's one. And here's a sign that you're approaching Simi Valley, okay? Right there. And maybe you've noticed that one as well. Here's the thing about signs. Signs don't exist for the sake of the sign. They all point to something else. These signs are famous in and of themselves, but they point to something that's bigger than the sign. So over the next 6 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the biggest signs that point to Jesus as being God in the flesh. Now, here's why this is important for every single one of us, whether you are new to this or you're just checking things out or you've been here forever. I want to talk about just several groups of people and see where you fit in this. Some of you grew up believing, but now you're not so sure. And maybe you're here today because, somebody threatened you or because you just come along because it's good for the family, but you're not so sure. Because you went to college and somebody said something in a science class and it made you think, I can't believe any of that. Or you had a boss that used to always pick on your faith and now you don't believe anymore. Or perhaps you had life just happen to you and you think, how could I believe in a God that would allow that to happen? And if that's where you are, this series is going to be so helpful for you. For some of us, though, it's not so much that we've stopped believing, we've just shifted our faith. It used to be found in church and with Jesus and the Bible and God, but now as we've gotten older and as we kind of think we've progressed a little bit, we say things like, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And maybe you're even watching this later on in the week because church attendance isn't something you're interested in, or you're just listening to it on podcasts on the treadmill or whatever, and you just catch a little bit of God here and there, but you're spiritual and you meditate and you're interested in things outside of this world, but you wouldn't consider yourself a Jesus person or a church person, and you've kind of got some doubts along the way. For some of you, you're not really sure what you believe, you just know what you don't want to become. And here's what I mean by that. You don't want to become that religious whack job that everybody's scared of in the office. Or like your stepdad was, or your mom was, or your first wife was, or whoever it was, and you think, I don't want to become that. I know that for sure, though I don't necessarily know what I believe. But then there's another group of us. You grew up in church. You grew up in the faith. You've had these beliefs for a long period of time. You just don't know why. And the moment somebody begins to question your belief system, you just go, well, I just have faith. I just got to have faith. Because I'm not even sure. I can't even understand it, but I know it's got to be true, and that's just part of faith. Now, here's part of our problem. Perhaps the two most misunderstood words in all of religion, and specifically Christianity, are these two words, faith and belief. Now, what's interesting about these two words is, if you take, theology and church aside and just deal with this in everyday life, everybody knows the difference between these two. If you say, I have faith this deal is going to close, it means you don't know if it is, you just hope that it will be. But if you say, I believe that it will close because of A, B, and C, now you have evidence to prove that it actually will close. In fact, the difference here is when you have belief, it's because you have belief in either the evidence or you have belief in the person telling you the evidence. And that's way different than just having faith. Now, what's interesting about this is when you were growing up in school and they taught you your multiplication tables and they said 8 times 8 is 64, you just believed it because you believed in the person teaching you. You didn't go home and line up 8 rows of 8 toys each, and count them all. Or maybe you did Common Core and said, maybe it's not 64. You're not really sure, okay? But whatever the case, you know what belief is based upon the evidence or it's based upon the person telling you that. From time to time, though, something conflicting happens. Let's talk about the thing that we all wrestle with. This is the big dilemma that we all face. This might be the most important thing we discuss today. How much coffee should a person drink in a day? Okay? Now think about that for a second. There was a period of time when we thought the more coffee, the better. Stimulates your heart. Everything's good. It has the same antioxidants as a couple of oranges. Good for you. Drink a pot a day. That's great. And then they start coming out and go, oh, no. Coffee's bad for you. Coffee's bad. Don't drink that much coffee. What do you choose to believe? You choose to believe what you want to believe. In other words, you got a little confirmation bias going on, and you read the articles that say coffee is good for you. So while the belief says that it's not good to have that much coffee a day, your faith says, I think it's going to be okay. That's kind of what's going on right there. Now, this is true with people as well. You have somebody in your life right now that they are constantly late, often don't even show up, and somebody says to you, are they going to show? Yeah, they're going to show. Did they show last time? No, they did not. Do they ever, stand you up? Yeah, they often do. Well, then why in the world do you believe they're going to show up? What you do is you have faith that they're going to show up, not belief. Here's the difference. We have faith for what we hope for, but we have belief in the signs that we see. We have faith in what we hope for, but we have belief in what we see signs for. So here's why this involves every single one of us. Unfortunately, when it comes to Christianity, some of you have grown up with people saying phrases that interchange these two words. And the moment you start to have doubts, somebody says to you, you just need to have more faith. Yeah, but I'm not sure if there's evidence. Well, then you just need to believe. And if you're from the South, you hear things like, you just need to have more faith, brother. You just need to have more belief, sister. Because you just think a little bit more of that will help you out. And you interchange these words. But here's the problem. Our lack of belief does not mean that we just need more faith. Our lack of belief is we just need more evidence. For many of us, the reason we have walked away from Jesus, now think about it, even if you haven't, you know somebody in your life that has. The reason you have walked away from Jesus has nothing to do with how much faith you had, but probably because you didn't have enough belief. And for many of us, the reason we have stayed away from Jesus is because we thought we didn't have enough faith when what we really lacked was belief. What we really lacked was evidence or signs that point us to what we should believe in. And maybe you're here right now, and you're thinking, I'm not sure what I believe about this. And my wife or my kids or my mom or my friends, they have enough faith to believe it. Can I just tell you, it's really not about having enough faith because there's plenty of evidence for you to believe. In fact, there's this great lecturer by the name of Frank Turk, and he says this: the reason so many people are easily talked out of Christianity is because they were never talked into it in the first place. In other words, you might have grown up with people saying, just have faith, just have faith, just have faith. And after a while, you think, I don't have enough faith. I need evidence. And I need it from somebody who's credible. That's what we're going to talk about over these next few weeks, because we happen to have a credible source. He was one of the many eyewitnesses to what Jesus did. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. He left his father and his fishing business for he and his brother to follow after Jesus. And years after Jesus was gone, he had told all these stories about what Jesus did, what Jesus did, what Jesus did. And somebody said, John, you got to write this stuff down. And so we believe John was a little bit older and his eyesight was probably failing, and so he probably dictated this to somebody else, and they wrote down these stories. But John took it a little bit differently because the other guys had already written their gospels that we have in scriptures. John said, I want to make sure I write these signs so that people know why they should believe in Jesus, not just that they have more information about Jesus. And John gets to the end of his book or his letter or his telling about Jesus, and he says this. This is so fascinating. Look what he says. You know what? Jesus performed many other signs. In other words, I've just given you pages and pages and pages of signs and evidence for Jesus. And you know what? There's so much more. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples. In other words, I was there. And not just me, the other guys as well. Ask them. Ask the other eyewitnesses that saw this. You can verify this. Everybody saw this, which are not even recorded in this book. And when he says this book, he doesn't mean the Bible. The Bible doesn't come around for another 400 years. He means in this particular letter that he is writing, which ended up being collected and put into a book we call the Bible. But these, all the things that I've just written to you, are written that you may believe. Now, that's big. It's not have faith. It's not have hope. It's not cross your fingers. But friends, I was there. I saw it. These are facts. And I write them down so that you may believe. And what are you going to believe? That Jesus is the Messiah. And that word's kind of lost on us if you don't have a Jewish upbringing. So he clarifies it for everybody. The Son of God. And that by believing, look at this, you may have life in his name. Here's what John is doing. He's basically, in this particular passage, outlining what he's done throughout this letter and what it means to follow after Jesus. And this is kind of his, kind of outline is what he's going with. Look at how he does this. Three words. The first one is this. Next slide. Signs. He's going to start with these evidences of what Jesus has done, into belief in what he did, and then into faith in what he will do. That's the progression. So in this series, we're going to look at 5 different signs that John points out. Now, let me just stop you right there before we go any further. I don't mean just miracles. Because Jesus didn't do miracles for shock and awe. Jesus didn't do miracles as random acts of kindness. Jesus didn't do miracles just to show off a little bit. Jesus did specific miracles at certain times amongst certain people as evidence for who he was, to point to his identity. And John says, you know what? I'm going to show you some of these, and these are not just miracles. Oh man, they're miraculous, but they are signs and they are evidence that point to why you can have more than just faith. You can have belief. So we're going to walk through 5 of these starting today. And then the Sunday before Easter, we're going to get to hear from the cold case investigator himself, Jim Wallace, or J. Warner Wallace. He will be here with us. He's been on Dateline and all those shows about evidence because he was a cold case investigator in Los Angeles, and he was an atheist. And he took his cold case skills and applied it to the Gospels and the resurrection and started with it like a murder scene. And he came away as a Christian, believing that the evidence proves that Jesus was the Son of God. Just like John said, signs that lead to belief in what he's done and faith in what he'll do. He's going to be here to tell his story. You do not want to miss that. And then the following week will be Easter, and we'll celebrate what Jesus has done and what his signs point to, and we'll celebrate that through baptism. If you have not signed up for baptisms, you can do that today, and we would love to have you sign up for that. There's going to be hundreds of people across all of our locations getting baptized. For those of you that watch online, come in for our Easter services and get baptized with us. It's going to be great. So here we go. Sign number 1. Are you ready? Here's the first one. And that is water to wine. Some of you just woke up. Are we serving wine? What's going on around here? Okay, I'm in. Cheers. But water to wine. This was a big sign, and this was one of the first signs that Jesus ever did. And John is there, and John writes it all down for us because he wants us to know how amazing this was. And it was more than just a miracle, it was a sign pointing to who Jesus is. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Now, Cana is a small little village about 3 to 4 miles from Nazareth where Jesus grew up. And so these people getting married are probably close friends to Jesus and to his mother Mary and to the disciples. They might have even had to bring a covered dish or some of the things that are a gift. You know, I don't know if they're registered at Bed Bath & Beyond or how that works, but they're going to show up there and they're going to be a part of this wedding. Here's what happens next. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Now, we find out that Mary is part of the hosting committee for this wedding, and Jesus and his disciples have been invited, which tells you something about Jesus. He's not this angry, brooding kind of individual that people are scared of. They like to have him around, and they want to have him at their wedding, and he doesn't just RSVP with regrets. He shows up. And John gives us this account because John was there. And he says, you can have confidence in what I'm telling you because I was an eyewitness. Now this, you got to understand this. Weddings are a big deal today. But back then, they didn't last for a day. They lasted upwards to a week. The whole village took off work. They all participated in the wedding. People came from all over to be part of the wedding, and they didn't just fly home the next day. They stayed there for days and days and days. And because of that, the wedding was a huge indication of how well this couple was prepared for life and what kind of honor this family had. Now, I've done a lot of weddings. And they're all incredible, and they're all special because of the people that are involved and all the efforts they put into it. I mean, the bride has dreamed about this day for her entire life. Her parents have mortgaged their home and sold blood and organs to be able to pay for this, right? They have videographers there, which always scares me because then whatever mistake I make is on video forever. And I'm always so scared I'm going to say the wrong name. I got it written down. I've confirmed with them. I know these people. And yet I'm still scared I'm going to say the wrong name. And the reason is because I'm afraid, that it might happen. I have a friend who's a pastor who not only said the wrong name of the bride, but said the guy's ex-wife's name. Yeah, that's epic. And I think about that every time. Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. There's people I do their wedding, and I can't pronounce their last name. And so what do you do except, I now pronounce to you Mr. and Mrs. And I just decided to start the clapping early. Mr. and Mrs. Just, hey, everybody. And no, everybody's clapping by then. They don't even know. I just kind of mumble it, right? And I'm nervous at that point because I don't want to mess up this wedding. And now they're at this wedding, Jesus and his disciples. It's going to be a week-long affair. Everything's shut down. Everybody's there. And disaster strikes. Look what happens here. When the wine was gone, let that sink in for just a moment. Okay? Jesus' mother said to him, Jesus, they have no more wine. Now, this is more than running out of cake or punch. Okay? This would be incredibly embarrassing back then. In the first century, this was a Middle Eastern culture that was honor-based. And if they ran out of supplies for everybody who was there, you don't go out and say, sorry, we're out. I mean, it would be such shame on the entire family. And Jesus' mother pulls Jesus aside and says, hey, they're out of wine. Which makes me wonder, why would she say this to Jesus? I mean, he hasn't performed a miracle or a sign up until this point, or has he? I mean, you wonder what it was like to raise Jesus as a boy. Do you ever think Mary ever said to Jesus, go clean your room? And he went, sure. And she's like, wow, well, that could come in handy, And she files that away and then comes up, hey, they're out of wine, all right? But this is fascinating because look at how Jesus responds, all right? Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. Now, we look at this and we think, well, that's a little offensive right there. I mean, kids, don't try this at home. Say, woman. And say, well, Jesus did it. Don't even, what would Jesus do that thing, all right? This phrase, when he says woman, this is more of a formal greeting. It's like saying ma'am. And they're in a formal setting. Jesus would not go, Mom, all right? But instead, Jesus goes, ma'am, why do you involve me? I've come to save the world, not save weddings. But this is what's fascinating. Mary knows her son. Look what happens then. She just turns to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. And I don't know if she kind of winks at them or if she's still staring at Jesus for calling her woman, all right? And she's raising an eyebrow like, are you talking to me? But she turns around to the servants and she says, do whatever he says. And she walks off. She leaves it in Jesus' hands. That's a lesson right there for all of us, right? Look what happens next. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. John wants you to know this. This is huge because back then it was a religious-based relationship with God. And the way you came to God was you had to cleanse and purify yourself, and you had these jars of water you would pour on your hands, and somebody would be standing there watching to make sure you clearly washed your hands and the water dripped off of your elbows. These jars represented the old covenant that God had made with Abraham and said, this is the way you will come to me. And so these jars are out there because it's a Jewish home and they need these jars for ceremonial washings. Jesus sees these. Let's go back to the verse. Here's what he says. They're on the side there, and each is holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Okay? Now these things are big. Now, I know in our day and age, we're all so scared of going dehydrated that we're all lugging around bottles of water and hydro flasks, and some of us carry like the whole Sparklets, 5-gallon thing around, whatever it is. These things are huge, 20 to 30 gallons. And these things were so heavy to carry about. But John wants us to know something significant is about to happen. He's going to use these Jewish ceremonial jars to do something brand new. Take a look at what Jesus says. He says to the servants, fill the jars with water. Now, we just read this as one sentence. Here's what that means. You take these empty jars, you go down to the river, you fill them up. And Jesus says, all the way to the brim. I don't want anybody thinking that there was a little bit of wine at the bottom and you filled it up with water and now there it is. He says, I want nothing in it but water all the way to the top. And they're taking these things all the way down and they're lugging them all the way back. And these things are weighing, just an enormous amount of weight. I mean, this is gallons and gallons of water. And he said, I want you to take them down there and I want you to bring them back. 6 of these go back and forth, and they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And so then they bring these jars to the master of the banquet, and they hand them over. And look what happens then. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. And he did not realize where it had come from. Though the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. And then he called the bridegroom aside. He said, hey, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. I mean, in other words, everybody brings out the Dom Perignon first, and then they bring out the $2 Chuck a little bit later, okay? Because everybody's, a little bit too buzzed to even know what's going on. And he says, but you have saved the best till now. In other words, this is a high-quality bouquet that Jesus has presented for everybody at this event. I want you to notice the symbolism here. He takes a jar that's used for ceremonial washings full of water connected to the old covenant, and he turns it into wine. Does it ring a bell? He'll use this at the Last Supper, wine for the new covenant. Jesus is saying, out with the old, in with the new. And then look how all this story wraps up. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first, here it is, of the signs through which he revealed his glory, showed us who he was, his identity, and his disciples. And John's saying, I know because I was one of them. We believed in him that day. Here's what he's saying. The reason I'm writing this to you is not just so you have more information about Jesus, but so that you will believe in Jesus. It's not enough just to have the facts. We want to put our trust in him. And John says, that day when we saw that, it went from old to new. The new has come, and we put our belief, not just our faith, our belief in Jesus. You see, Jesus never came just to be a good guy. Jesus never came just to be a good teacher. Jesus came to take away the old and bring the new. And John says, that's sign number one. That's where it began. Now, what's that mean for you and me? What's that mean for your day-to-day life? Can I just talk to three groups of people? Group number one, for those of you who would say, I'm not sure if I'm a believer yet. You've been kind of coming along with family or friends, or even you're just checking things out and doing your investigation, or maybe you were with us on Christmas Eve and you decided, yep, I'm going to get on the train, so to speak, and see what this is all about. And I am so glad that you are here, and this is a safe place. Can I just tell you something? That you have an opportunity to have more than just faith, because belief is based on evidence. I mean, those of you who are not yet followers of Jesus, you have questions or you have doubts. You don't just have to hit the faith button and say, well, I guess I'll never know. You actually have reasons for your belief. Christianity is not a just believe it because I said so kind of religion. It is so different than that, where you get to have evidence for what it is that you believe. And John says, I'm going to give you these signs because I wasn't sure, but now I know. And for many of you right now, you might just be tired with your faith. You've been propping up a little bit of facts and evidence and belief on a whole lot of faith. And as years go by and as life happens, you're losing that faith and thus losing your foundation. Can I just tell you, you can flip that around and there's a ton of belief evidence you can build your foundation upon, and faith comes off of that, not under that. Notice again what John says here. Look at this verse. When Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. In other words, there's our progression again. It starts with the signs, which moves to our identity, which moves to the belief. The signs, what Jesus did, to his identity, to our belief. I mean, look at this phrase again. He says, but these signs are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name. In other words, these signs change our belief in his identity, which changes our belief in who he is and what he will do. Friends, if you're still on the outside looking in, it's okay. You can belong here long before you believe, but there is evidence for what you can believe. Here's the second group. For those of you who are followers of Jesus, maybe you're right now just going through the motions. Can I just pull something out of this passage for you? Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. Is that not a great line from Mary? Do whatever he tells you to do. Sometimes when I do weddings, I'll talk about this passage. And if I've done your wedding, you've probably heard me talk about this passage. And there might come a moment during that wedding where I just say, you know what the secret is to a good marriage? Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. Love like Jesus would and has. Forgive like Jesus has. Serve like Jesus did and does. Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. So let me just ask you, for those of you who consider yourselves followers of Jesus, is there anything that Jesus is telling you to do that you've said, no, not yet? Maybe it's generosity, opening up your hands towards God. Maybe it is spending time with God on a daily basis. Maybe it's baptism. There's something in you that says, I don't need that. But if for no other reason, Jesus said so. And maybe it's time for you to join us on Easter and get baptized. Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. One last group. For those of you that are just tired, here's what I mean by that. You serve in some kind of way around here. You work in children's ministry, or you work, set up and tear down over at Canyon Church, or you work in the parking team at Valencia, or you help out leading a small group, or you're leading an FPU group right now. Can I just give you one thing? Don't grow weary in doing good. Paul says it that way in one of his letters. Just do not grow weary in doing good. Think about those guys taking those jars down and filling them up with water. On the way back, as they're dragging those things up the hill and that water has turned to wine and is sloshing out of there, they're the first to see that miracle. Can I tell you what you are in a position to do while you serve around here? You are the first to see the miracles God will do in people's lives. Obedience. Obedience is the way we remember anybody of our sacred fathers, right? Abraham and Moses and Noah and these great patriarchs. It's just because they decided, I'm not going to grow weary in doing what is good. I'm just going to keep doing it. And I know there's times it's difficult. I know there's times you don't want to show up, you don't want to lead. I know for our poor parking crew at Valencia on Sunday morning, you get all kinds of expressions shown to you at times. Don't grow weary of doing good. For some of you working in children's ministry, sometimes you deal with less than happy parents at times, and that's okay. Don't grow weary of doing good. For those of you who work in student ministry and you deal with junior high kids, don't grow weary of doing good. Because you get to see the miracle first. These signs are shown to you so that you might believe, and that by believing, you would have life in his name. Well, that's where we're going over the next few weeks. We've talked about sign 1. Next week we get to sign 2, and it's a doozy. And I can't wait for you to experience that. But right now we're going to participate in communion. And so I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to take communion together. God, thank you for your incredible mercy and grace in our lives. We thank you for your love for us. And God, right now, we just want to ask, is there anything you're telling me to do? Is there anything you're telling me to do right now, God, that I'm saying no to? Or would you just impress that on our minds right now? Is there anything you're telling us to do? And may we take that step. God, I know there's some right now who have never yet said yes to you, and I want to give them an opportunity to do that right now. And if that's you, wherever you are, I just want to invite you just to quietly say these words after me and in your own mind between you and God. God, I don't have all the faith. I don't have all the evidence. But I know enough to say yes to you. I'm asking you to be my leader and my forgiver. God, thank you for the promise you give to all of us that as we take a step towards you, you come running to us. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.